whether we'll end up with the government's more cautious approach to providing medicinal cannabis for those who are ill, or whether Chloe Swarbrick's bill gets the nod. National support of the government's bill, but not Chloe Swarbrick. So the government's proposing a scheme to allow cannabis-based medicinal products and provide a criminal defence for anyone terminally ill charged with possession of marijuana. It would set up a domestic medicinal marijuana market, making it easier for people to access. But Chloe Swarbrick's members' bill goes further, allowing the terminally ill and debilitated the ability to legally grow cannabis if prescribed it by their doctor. And your opinion's welcome. Grace Yates was going to be in Parliament right on the floor of the chamber, the little girl who was cruelly afflicted with ADEM, and the family wants to be able to grow their own cannabis. Do you see a reason why not? What are your thoughts on this, please?
If it's prescribed by a doctor, then I think it makes a lot of sense. I can't really see how you could argue. Well, I can, because lots of people will, but I think it makes a lot of sense if it's prescribed by a doctor and it's all controlled. It's not a free-for-all, go and have a big veggie patch or anything, but I think it's a very sensible idea, and it's a very modern thing that this country should do. Is
it a bit awkward, though, having some people, for however great the reasons, growing it in their backyard, and someone looking over the fence who isn't able to grow it? Is it a bit odd?
I live next door to someone that's 87, so it would be kind of odd if she was growing it, and I guess she's more likely to be allowed to than me medically. Perhaps,
I think
aren't we more grown up than that?
Okay. Does whatever you do loosen up the supply of cannabis for people who are ill, open the door to a blind eye being turned to more wholesale use of the drug?
And if it does, is that a bad thing?
I think this is a shameful moment for us. New Zealand has been such a progressive country on so many issues like this. I mean, we know that cannabis as a drug is something which the criminalisation of which disproportionately criminalises Māori, even when you control for usage. We know that it's much less harmful than our predominant legal drug. Chloe Swarbrick's bill is the far better of the two, but ultimately, we've got a young progressive government. We've got a rush of energy into our politics and of fresh ideas, and yet this one just seems like if America can, half its states can legalise cannabis, and if much of Europe has drug policy which seem much more sort of harm based, this seems like a real kind of embarrassing halfway step to me.
Progressive governments are paradoxically sometimes quite conservative because they don't want to be perceived too early on as too progressive.
Yeah, so I guess that is the sort of what people who are in favour of reform must be hoping for in some way. But you kind of often only get one swing at this kind of issue during a spell in government, and if you use it on something that is very weak, and I think was rightly harshly criticised by Dylan Kelly on Morning Report this morning, you may not get another look at it for 15 years, by which time a lot of the damage that you're continuing to do every day with this sort of outmoded and illogical legislation continues to be done.
Be interesting to hear what's said in Parliament tonight, and we'll finish on another strange but at the same time exciting story. Developers plan to turn 4 kilometres of tunnels right in the middle of Auckland under Albert Park in the CBD into a subterranean tourist attraction, the biggest built tourist attraction in New Zealand from the sound of their enthusiasm. The main tunnel runs from Victoria Street to the bottom of Parnell, and that could be an underground cycleway and walkway. Bill and Nicholas Reid are behind this plan. They say it could be open in 6 months if the council gives the go-ahead. Underground bars, restaurants, a glowworm cave. And we were keen to know exactly what is required for council to give it the go-ahead, but that information wasn't forthcoming today. Does this excite you? Is this what Auckland needs? Subterranean expansion?
This is a stupid idea. Auckland is beautiful. Come to New Zealand and go in a hole in the ground. Cool, excellent. Why do we need to build tourist attractions? We have the most amazing tourist attractions here developing every day, naturally. So I think it's stupid.
I love it.
Oh my God, we found something to disagree on. Finally. Excellent.
No, it's new revenue for council and a fun thing to do. Let's just open it up. They're already there. It's not like we're drilling new holes.
Maybe put the Harmony Star shining in the dark down there.
You can have the Harmony, the Humanity Star, isn't it? But anyway, you can have the Humanity Star for that, Duncan. There you go. It's my gift to you.
Fair enough.
Ellen Reid, thank you. Enjoy your time in Wellington.
I will do, thank you.
Nice to have you on. And Duncan Grieve, good to see you back.
Thanks for having me.
And thanks for your company, everybody. Checkpoint with John Campbell coming right up.
RNZ News at 5. Kia ora, good afternoon. Ko Katrina Batanaho. National's Deputy Leader, Paula Bennett, has dismissed speculation about her position, saying she's heard nothing but support from her colleagues. National MPs have privately told RNZ there's discontent about Mrs Bennett as the party grapples with the best way to recover from losing power. Mrs Bennett says she's confident she has the full backing of the caucus.
Yeah, feeling great. It's a huge privilege to be in any sort of position where you are, in a deputy leadership position where you're helping to lead your party and that sort of thing. It's a job I love, and certainly I've had no indications whatsoever today of anything but full support.
Paula Bennett says she expects Bill English to lead the National Party into the next election. A fire near the forestry blocks in the Catlins is now out after a busy day for firefighters in Southland as temperatures rose to 33 degrees in the region. Fire crews have been on standby in Southland and Otago as the temperatures soar once again, but the area is also bracing for heavy rain, which is due to hit from this afternoon. Rachel Graham reports.
Fire crews in Southland have been fighting fires in 33-degree heat today. Fires broke out in Lumsden, Riverton and Tahakopa near the Catlins, but all fires are now out. Crews have been on standby in response to the heatwave which has been affecting the region. Cooler weather is on the way after today, but brings with it heavy rain, with the heaviest downpours expected starting this afternoon in Fiordland and Westland. The Dunedin and Southland councils are monitoring the situation and are warning people to be prepared for possible flooding. This is Rachel Graham.
Fire and Emergency has apologised for mistakenly releasing private details of some of the people who called 111 during last year's Port Hills fires. The error occurred yesterday after the organisation announced their investigation into the two fires was closed due to a lack of evidence. Maya Burry reports.
Two reports on the investigation released yesterday included some phone numbers and addresses for people who called 111 during the blaze, as well as private details for two witnesses who reported suspicious behaviour. Fire and Emergency's Chief Executive, Rhys Jones, says he sincerely apologises to the individuals affected, and the Office of the Privacy Commissioner has been notified. One person who had their private information released says they were shocked and angry when they heard about the breach, but accepted the apology. Mr Jones says corrected versions of the reports will be made available on their website. This is Maya Burry.
The Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern has paid tribute to the families of the 29 men who died in the Pike River mine disaster for never giving up on getting their loved ones back. She was in Greymouth today opening the Pike River Recovery Agency. With a budget of $23 million, it now has just over a year to complete a manned re-entry of the first 2.3-kilometre section of the mine to recover the men and look for clues as to why it exploded. Ms Ardern says the deaths of the mine workers were entirely preventable and the families have been denied closure. The American President Donald Trump has been listing what he sees as his administration's successes during his first State of the Union address. Mr Trump told lawmakers business and the stock market are booming, unemployment has fallen and tax cuts are helping millions of Americans. And after a year of deep division in the country, he spoke of the need for bipartisan unity.
Tonight, I call upon all of us to set aside our differences, to seek out common ground and to summon the unity we need to deliver for the people. This is really the key. These are the people we were elected to serve.
Donald Trump says it's never been a better time to live the American dream. A former military spy convicted of stealing sensitive operational equipment and drugs charges will take his case to the Court of Appeal. Corporal Richard Graham had walked away from the District Court without convictions, but the Crown has successfully appealed that decision in the High Court. Edward Gay reports.
The Air Force officer spent 3 years in an intelligence role and used his security clearance to access 2 storerooms to steal the military equipment. The police also found drugs during their investigation. The District Court judge found the consequences of the offending outweighed the seriousness of the crime. But that decision was overturned by Justice Hinton following an appeal to the High Court by the Crown. The judge noted that no other case remotely similar had resulted in a discharge without conviction. Graham's lawyer Carl Trotter says he's applied to the Court of Appeal to take the case further. I Tamaki Makoto ko Edward Gaiaho.
It's 5 minutes past 5. Sport, denying Nolene Taurua the chance to coach the Silver Ferns, has come back to haunt them. The former Silver Ferns assistant and Waikato Bay of Plenty Magic head coach admits she's been helping Australian coach Lisa Alexander during the recent quad series which the Diamonds won. Taurua says her time with the side has not only taught her how to strengthen the world number ones, but also how to beat them.
Because I sort of have a clearer understanding of how players play and their style and how they train. There's definitely gaps or definitely areas of weakness that they can be exposed in. We only look probably at 20% of the opposition and 80% is about ourselves.
Nolene Taurua. French club Lyon has confirmed it has signed former All Black Charlie Ngatai. The Chiefs midfielder confirmed yesterday he was set to head to France at the end of the Super Rugby season. Brother and sister Oliver and Susanna Leyden-Davis will contest the badminton mixed doubles at the Commonwealth Games. The Hamilton-born pair played together at the Glasgow Games 4 years ago, finishing 17th. Oliver Leyden-Davis also competed at Delhi in 2010, where he finished 5th in the men's doubles. And Swansea City have climbed out of the relegation zone in English football's Premier League with a 3-1 win over Arsenal. Arsenal remain in 6th place but are now 8 points off the top 4 and Champions League's qualification. That's the news.
Tonight on Nights, Liat Collins reports from Jerusalem, the capital of Israel, according to the United States. And there's the relentless positivity of self-help specialist Dexter Gruff and his busy brain guru guest, Nancy Newman.
Well, how hard can it be? You just get a bunch of people in a room, they sit in silence for an hour, and they give you $2,000.
Exactly.
You know?
It's kind of like babysitting.
Silence is gold. That'll go nicely with a supermoon rise during Nights with me, Brian Crump, after the news at 7 on RNZ National.
Met service weather through to midnight tomorrow and warnings for very heavy rain and severe gales cover central and southern New Zealand. Northland to Wellington, including Coromandel Bay of Plenty and the Central High Country, fine today, apart from isolated showers from Northland to Bay of Plenty. A period of rain tomorrow with possible downpours. Northerly gales tomorrow, severe about Wellington and Taranaki. Gisborne to Wairarapa, fine today, scattered rain spreading north tomorrow with northerly gales. Marlborough, Nelson and Buller, isolated showers today. Rain with downpours tomorrow, easing in the evening. Severe gales for a time tomorrow. Westland and Fiordland, rain becoming widespread and heavy this evening, downpours and severe gales for a time tomorrow. Canterbury, fine today with high cloud, rain and severe gales about the high country tomorrow, spreading elsewhere during the day. Otago and Southland, mainly fine today, rain with heavy falls developing overnight and easing late tomorrow. The Chatham Islands, fine spells. It's 8 minutes past 5.
Tutumarai, hoa mahe kōrero kei te haere, he kaupapa kei te karawhiua. Welcome everyone to Checkpoint for the last day of January. Thank you for being with us tonight. Medicinal cannabis and Parliament, the long, slow journey back into the Pike River mine takes a formal step forward. What happens when heavy rain, Katrina was just telling us about it, falls on hard, dry land? Wellington's rental market, racism at school, and we're live at Jacinda Ardern's What's Next speech. 9 minutes past 5, just before we move on tonight. Firefighters are battling a large fire in a forest company yard near Invercargill. The fire is being fanned by strong winds and has spread from a pile of vegetation into dry grass on Kekeno Place. Thick smoke is crossing the nearby Invercargill Bluff Highway. The highway is currently blocked to traffic. A fertiliser works directly across the highway from the fire has been evacuated as a precaution. 5 helicopters have been deployed to tackle the fire and 12 crews, including 4 tankers and 1 command unit, are also working to bring it under control. Of course, there is an extreme fire risk in the drought conditions of Otago. Southland will update you the moment we have any more details, but that highway between Invercargill and Bluff closed to the traffic. We begin tonight with two of the least secure jobs in Parliament, the leader and deputy leader of the opposition after an election defeat. Such were National's numbers in the election that speculation about Bill English's position has been muted and theoretical in the 3.5 months since Winston Peters went with Labour. But suddenly this morning, pop. Media speculation, National MPs being asked about their leadership on the way into Parliament, and Bill English taking questions on the subject after what should have been an agenda-setting State of the Nation speech. The party is grappling with the best way to recover from its election loss, and much of the discussion is around the way the leadership team handled the failed coalition negotiations with New Zealand First. We begin with our Deputy Political Editor, Chris Bramwell.
National Party MPs have privately told RNZ there are no specific moves against Bill English as leader, but there are pockets of discontent about his deputy Paula Bennett. Some believe the leadership team did not do enough to establish a relationship with Winston Peters and New Zealand First during the last term, and question the strategy of the choice of negotiators who ended up at the table and ultimately lost out to Labour. On their way into Parliament today, MPs were playing down the talk. Former Cabinet Minister Anne Tolley was remaining firmly behind the current leadership team.
We're very happy with Bill English and Paula Bennett as our leader. It's just absolute scurrilous gossip.
These backbenchers were also supporting the status quo.
No, there's not going to be no leadership challenge.
Have you heard about the numbers being done though to roll?
No, someone's telling you a lot of fibs.
Oh look, I can't comment on that. It's we're right behind Bill and Paula at the moment, and it's going well.
I haven't even given that any thought. In my view, this is way speculative. Bill English had a fantastic result in the election. Sure, we're not the government, and I think all this is just idle speculation, and I haven't given it any thought.
In opposition, although a bit of leadership speculation certainly does turn out the journalists for lunch. I hope someone feeds them so they get in a good mood. I'm sure you all had a good summer.
Bill English gave his State of the Nation speech to a business audience in Wellington this afternoon. He attacked the way the government plans to reduce child poverty and plant trees, as well as launching a campaign to fight its employment law changes. But his speech was overshadowed by questions about National's leadership.
I have to say I enjoy more support in the caucus and the party membership and our supporters than ever.
Mr English says he's getting on with the job and dismissed the speculation as gossip.
I'd be surprised if there's any political caucus where there isn't sometimes some talk about, who's next or who's third in line or who's fourth in line. I mean, these are ambitious people who want to change the way the world works and see politics as a way of doing that. So I wouldn't be at all surprised if there's some talk. But I'd have to say the conflation of that into some kind of threat to my leadership, I think, is ridiculous.
Standing alongside Mr English at the media conference today, Selwyn MP Amy Adams was asked if she had any leadership ambitions.
Bill English is a remarkable leader, and I've got absolutely zero interest in a change of leader or in the leadership team. I think what Bill has done for New Zealand and for the party is a truly remarkable record, and we're very lucky to have him, and there's no desire that I'm aware of that there's any change for that.
And do you lead the National Party?
Oh, look, who knows where the future goes, but what I'm saying is I want Bill English to continue to lead us for a long time yet.
National's Deputy Leader Paula Bennett also dismissed speculation about her position, saying she's had nothing but support from her colleagues. She says she's confident she has the full backing of the caucus.
Yeah, feeling great. It's a huge privilege to be in any sort of position where you are, in a deputy leadership position where you're helping to lead your party and that sort of thing. It's a job I love, and certainly I've had no indications whatsoever today of anything but full support.
Mrs Bennett was also full of praise for Mr English and wants him to lead the party into the 2020 election.
Yeah, absolutely. God, I hope so. He's just doing such a great job.
The party goes into a 2-day caucus meeting late next week in Tauranga, where it's a safe bet that the leadership speculation will continue to rumble on. Atui te whare pari mata mō te hōtaka o te ahi nei, ko Chris Bramwell ahau.
Let's go now live to our political editor, Jane Patterson, who beams in from Parliament. Hi, Jane. Lovely to talk to you. What's going on here? Is Bill English on death row, or is his response to it this afternoon, which was that being the leader of the opposition is contingent upon performance, and he plans to perform, an entirely reasonable one?
Look, those
comments were very carefully presented. He was asked whether he would commit to leading the party into the 2020 election. He said that wasn't a commitment he could make because his position is dependent on the support of MPs. And in the National Party, if you lose the support of the majority of the caucus, you are out. So in that way, it was a fair enough response, but he basically said if he commits to the performance that will maintain the confidence of the MPs. But look, what's happening here, John, I think is inevitable after what happened at the end of last year, after that election result, is going to be talk about whether the leadership team is the right one to lead National into the next election. And look, it's early days, but MPs, I think, have probably had a bit of time to look back over the Christmas break, over what happened. Some of the discontent that I've heard is about how the negotiations were handled last year, that the National Party leadership hadn't done enough to build that relationship with New Zealand First and Winston Peters through the term, and then the way the negotiations clearly turned out. Now, Bill English said he takes full responsibility for what happened there, and he said at the time he actually did consider standing down, but he got the support and vocal support from his caucus. So I think this is part of a longer term consideration about where the National Party goes, but really with some rankling still about the fact that they are sitting on the opposition benches and look over at Labour on the government benches, something they just actually didn't expect to happen.
And we go back to election night. National got, 44.4, Labour got 36.9, so 37%. And so the issue clearly was not the performance of a third-term government, which actually in terms of votes did really well. It was that the Māori Party fell over, National hadn't done enough to make them attractive to the electorate, and National couldn't negotiate with Winston First. And lots of the talk that I'm hearing is about the fact that Paula Bennett had an abysmal relationship with Winston Peters. Is that problematic? Is that the issue? And is Paula Bennett therefore in more trouble than Bill English?
Look, the talk is certainly more focused on Paula Bennett, and not just because of the negotiations or any relationship she may or may not have, but her performance as deputy leader in the eyes of some MPs. And look, I must stress, there are 56 MPs in this caucus, and I would describe it potentially better as pockets of discontent, but her name is coming up. And the fact with that is that as her deputy, Bill English and Paula Bennett are tight. They are a tight unit. So if there was any move against Paula Bennett, that would effectively be a move against Bill English as well, a vote of no confidence in the leadership. Now, I don't get any sense that that is imminent. And people I've talked to said that there would be a backlash if anyone was seen to move against Bill English in particular, whether that was by de facto through Paula Bennett or against him directly. So at the moment, there is no groundswell that I can sense in terms of a vote or a spill or anything approaching that. What we're more looking about is the ambitious senior MPs really starting to look at what a future leadership team might look like, and underneath that some niggles about last year, some niggles about what is going to be facing the National Party this year, directed at that leadership team. And again, I think that's reflected in Bill English's comments about his performance, a message to his caucus that he intends to step up and perform and keep their confidence. And that is he also talked to his caucus through the media today, saying discipline is important. The National Party have been a disciplined caucus through government, and the worst thing for an opposition party in particular is when MPs publicly or privately start to talk down the leadership, because that can light a match under events that can spiral pretty quickly out of control in terms of leadership and changes and all sorts of different consequences.
Joan Patterson, our political editor, joining us live from Wellington on a busy day in Parliament. We'll be back there shortly. Let's go to Invercargill. Let's return to Invercargill. We were talking about this about, 8 minutes ago. Firefighters are battling a large fire, we're told, in a forest company yard. The Invercargill Bluff Highway is closed to traffic. The last we heard, we have on the phone now with the very latest, Sally Chesterfield, who is the Emergency Management Centre Coordinator. Sally, welcome to Checkpoint. It's nice to talk to you. What is the latest? Is that Invercargill Bluff Highway still closed?
Yeah, at this point, the Invercargill Bluff Highway is still closed to traffic, so please, if people are heading that way, you might have to wait a wee while.
OK, and what's the situation with the fire? Are you getting it under control?
Yeah, so at the moment we've got 5 helicopters on site or heading to site. We've got 5 tankers and a number of crews down there. We've deployed a incident management team to the site to take charge of the situation. The fire is across the road from a fertiliser plant which has been evacuated. At this point there's no threat to the fertiliser plant and it's more of an inconvenience at this point that the road is blocked.
OK, 5 choppers, that's a big old fire, isn't it? And of course it is dry there, but you are confident you're on top of it.
Well, that's right, excuse me. It is very dry and that's why we're having such a large response to the fire to ensure that we can get on top of it.
Thanks, Sally. We really appreciate it. Sally Chesterfield, the Emergency Management Centre Coordinator. So they are fighting the fire so far very successfully in Invercargill, but the road through to Bluff closed for the time being. We'll update you if that is reopened while we're on air. 5:20. We said we were going back to Parliament. Let's do it right now. The fate of a bill allowing people to grow their own medicinal cannabis will likely come down to a handful of MPs. Green MP Chloe Swarbrick says she's been crunching the numbers and it's touch and go whether she'll have the backing for her bill, which is currently being debated in Parliament. This is just to send it through, of course. This wouldn't make it law. Our political reporter, May Heron, has been at a picnic on Parliament's front lawn organised in support of the bill.
Heads turned as the sound of 2 wheelchairs racing across the Parliament forecourt and squeals of excitement pierced the air. It was the sound of 2 friends meeting for the first time after 10 years of talking online. Nicola Smith and Karen Ashford both have CRIPS, complex regional pain syndrome, and have been supporting and sharing their experiences with each other over the past decade. Both of them take medicinal cannabis to manage pain caused by the incurable disorder, but they say it is difficult to access it legally.
Doctors don't believe that you actually need it or you don't meet the criteria.
A lot of peer pressure from the doctors themselves. A lot of doctors have just said straight out they won't prescribe it even though they're allowed to.
They say Chloe Swarbrick's bill is a matter of life and death. A friend of theirs died recently.
She's 21 with CRIPS, this young girl, and she's died.
Wow, she was really bad.
She was really bad. The last post she said was 3 months of crying when pain is too much.
The government's medicinal cannabis bill, which passed its first reading yesterday, lays the groundwork for a regulated medicinal cannabis industry and would only provide it for terminally ill patients. Chloe Swarbrick's bill gives people the right to grow their own cannabis and would also allow people with debilitating conditions to use the drug. Shane Lebrun says that's important.
I was a Conservative soldier type, used to vote National and all of that. And then my wife suffered a spine injury. And after 5 years of playing the runner around with oxycodone and fentanyl and all of these other hard drugs, we got desperate and we tried cannabis and it worked. And it worked as well as all of the hippies said.
14-year-old Grace Yeats, who suffers from an incurable brain disease after contracting a virus 4 years ago, uses Sativex, the only cannabis-based medicine allowed to be distributed in New Zealand. It is extremely expensive, over $1,000 a month. Grace's solo mum Tracy has no choice but to fundraise. They only have a 6-month supply left. She says it's an exhausting way to live.
There's a huge anxiety around having to maybe one day deny her the medicine that helps her. I just can't do that.
She has this message for any MPs undecided about voting for Chloe Swarbrick's bill.
They need to listen to their compassionate side. This could happen to anybody, any walk of life, any age. You never know when the tables are going to turn and you find yourself in a desperate situation to need medicinal cannabis.
Yesterday, the National Party decided to largely vote against the bill. Given it's unlikely everyone in Labour and New Zealand First will support it, it may well come down to the wire. Atu i te whare parimata mō te hōtaka o te ahi, ko May Heron aho.
From Wellington to Washington, where President Donald Trump has delivered his first State of the Union address, heralding a new American moment for the United States. The State of the Union is one of the really big set pieces of the US political calendar, in a time when the President lays out his vision for the year to a joint session of Congress and, of course, to the country. His staff reportedly worked on it for a long time, and it's thought the President did stay on script. Elizabeth Brown has this report.
This was a speech in which Donald Trump left his Twitter persona at home, stuck to the teleprompter and familiar key messages. Speaking against a backdrop of a fractured America and deep divisions between Republicans and Democrats, he spoke of the need for bipartisan unity.
Tonight, I call upon all of us to set aside our differences, to seek out common ground, and to summon the unity we need to deliver for the people. This is really the key. These are the people we were elected to serve.
Donald Trump paraded what he called the economic success story of his administration: GDP growth, the booming stock market, falling unemployment, and his tax cuts, which he claims will help millions of Americans.
There has never been a better time to start living the American dream. So to every citizen watching at home tonight, no matter where you've been or where you've come from, this is your time.
The US president unveiled a massive $1.3 trillion infrastructure plan, saying America is a nation of builders, but its infrastructure is now a disgrace. And as he's done over the past year, Mr. Trump tied security and immigration together. He blamed the rise of terrorism and gangs on lax security and immigration policy, calling for an end to migrants automatically being able to bring their families to America and the scrapping of the visa lottery system. Internationally, he touted America's success in fighting Islamic State and said he's now taken action to ensure the US can continue to detain accused terrorists.
Today, I'm keeping another promise. I just signed, prior to walking in, an order directing Secretary Mattis to re-examine our military detention policy and to keep open the detention facilities in Guantanamo Bay.
While up to 40 million viewers tuned in to watch Mr. Trump's speech, he didn't deliver it to a full Congress. In the biggest known boycott of a State of the Union, more than a dozen Democratic lawmakers did not take their seats in the House. Oregon Democrat Earl Blumenauer was one of them.
He's lied repeatedly to the American people. He's sowed discord. He's failed to take advantage of opportunities to bring us together, and simply doesn't appear to even know his own mind, confusing his own staff. I don't think there's anything to be gained by my dignifying a performance of a reality TV star.
But that view was countered by Republican House Speaker Paul Ryan, who says the outlook for America looks rosy.
To be able to hear a State of the Union as bright as it is right now is something that's very encouraging. Wages are rising, economic confidence is coming back to America.
One of the key takeaways for the media today was the fact that in a break with tradition, Melania Trump travelled to Congress separately from her husband. The pair haven't been seen together publicly since New Year's Eve, after reports of an alleged affair between Mr. Trump and an adult film star. However, the White House said Mrs. Trump simply left first to greet guests, and they will travel back to the White House together. For Checkpoint, Elizabeth Brown.
The government followed through on one of its first 100-day promises today that was very important to a group of people on the West Coast. Opening an agency in Greymouth responsible for recovering the bodies of the 29 men who died in the Pike River mine. It was a day charged with emotion. There's family members who have fought tooth and nail for the past 7 years to get their men back out of Pike, to get someone into Pike, at least to go up the drift and see what is there. Watch the Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern declare the Pike River Recovery Agency open for business. Our reporter Conan Young was there.
With a budget of $23 million, the Pike River Recovery Agency, Te Kahu Whakamana Rua Te Kaumā Iwa, now has just over a year to complete a manned re-entry of the first 2.3 kilometre section of the mine. Its job to recover the men and look for clues as to why the mine exploded. Jacinda Ardern paid tribute to the families of the 29 men and noted their deaths were entirely preventable.
Since that day, you have been denied closure, denied knowing with certainty what happened, and denied a voice. Today, that changes. Today we launched Te Kahui Whakamana Rua Te Kaumā Iwa.
Ms Ardern said the families would be involved in every decision the agency made and noted the Māori name given to it, which translates as the empowering voice for the Pike 29. Bernie Monk, who lost his son in the explosion, held back tears as he thanked the new government for its commitment to getting back into the mine.
I'm honoured to be the spokesperson for the Pike River families, and I can only say to them how courageous they've been. They've fought this battle in the media, at the gates of Parliament, the gates of Pike, and they've fought this battle in the courts.
The tears also flowed for Anna Osborne, who lost her husband and has been at the core of the campaign to get the men back.
Every day I wake up hoping that today will be the day that we might get some closure. Our men deserve this. Our men deserve some truth. They deserve the justice, and the families deserve the closure.
Sonia Rockhouse, who lost a son, said she could not believe that only a year ago the families had been forced to blockade a road to prevent contractors from pouring 20 metres of concrete into the entrance to the mine to permanently seal it.
I remember sitting in the pop-top caravan up there on that road during that time, discussing with Anna the ramifications of what we were doing. We had both decided that whatever hand was dealt to us, we were totally prepared to deal with. Because at that point we had nothing to lose. We had been deceived and lied to so many times over the years. We both felt this action was the only option we had left.
The minister in charge of the agency, Andrew Little, was the head of the union representing mine workers when the disaster occurred. He says the government has a moral duty to attempt to recover the men's bodies, and referred to the failure of labour inspectors to pick up on gross health and safety failures at the mine.
And we do it not only because of a sense of compassion that our Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern totally encompasses, but actually because when you look at this tragedy and the avoidable nature of it, actually the state had a part to play in it.
The agency will have a staff of 9, including some of the experts that have been helping the families and have said all along that manned re-entry is possible. Its funding of $23 million stretches over 3 years, and its work may extend beyond simply entering the mine's 2.3 kilometre long entry tunnel. Beyond this lays the main workings of the mine, where most of the men were known to be working. Asked today when a decision would be made on entering this section, the agency's chief executive, Major General David Gawn, said nothing would be decided until the entry tunnel had been explored, which would take at least a year. In Greymouth for Checkpoint, ko Konanyang tēnei.
You are with Checkpoint on RNZ. Thank you for being with us. A report released today reveals children as young as 3 have been victims of racism. We'll look at that coming up. Wellington's housing crisis is described as a perfect storm as tenants battle spiralling rents. We're going to cross live to the Prime Minister's speech outlining the government's ambitions beyond its first 100 days. Quite an extraordinary day on the New Zealand markets too. We'll hear more on that. But before it all, with the time at 28 to 6, here's Katrina with the headlines.
Nationals Deputy Paula Bennett has dismissed speculation about her position, saying she's heard nothing but support from her colleagues. There's been some talk among National MPs about whether the current leadership team is the right one to go to lead it into the next election. Firefighters are battling a large blaze in a forestry company yard near Invercargill. The fire, which spread from a pile of vegetation into dry grass, is being fanned by strong winds. Thick smoke is crossing the Invercargill Bluff Highway, which is blocked to traffic. 5 helicopters and 12 crews are tackling the fire. Southland has activated its Emergency Coordination Centre to prepare for possible flooding tomorrow, just 2 days after drought was declared in the region. Met Service is forecasting 75 to 130 millimetres of rain to fall in the headwaters of Southland rivers and up to 60 millimetres around the coast from midnight tonight. Up to 130 millimetres of rain is also forecast for Otago, with less for Dunedin, but the City Council's preparing for possible flooding. It expects more runoff than usual because the ground is so dry after the hot summer. Green MP Chloe Swarbrick says it's touch and go whether she'll have the backing for her bill allowing people to grow their own medicinal cannabis. The government's medicinal cannabis bill, which regulates supply for terminally ill patients only, passed its first reading yesterday. Chloe Swarbrick's bill would allow people with debilitating conditions to use the drug. US President Donald Trump has proclaimed a new American moment as he delivered his maiden State of the Union speech to Congress. The Republican leader says he's extending an open hand to Democrats to work together. Mr Trump also said he was ordering Guantanamo Bay to be kept open, reversing an Obama-era directive to close the controversial detention camp. Those are the headlines. I'm back at 6 o'clock.
Thank you very much indeed, Katrina. It's time to talk business with Jonathan Mitchell, who beams in from Wellington. Hi, Jono. Fascinating down the markets today. We're going to come back to that. But you've been taking a look at New Zealand's transparency rating?
That's right. This is all to do with the country's financial transparency. This survey is done by the Tax Justice Network. They do it every couple of years and look at things such as dodging taxes, hiding assets and money laundering. And the higher you are on the list, the more transparent you are. So we're middle of the pack at 58 out of 112 countries. Last time we were 54. So New Zealand's done a lot to help its ranking. It's implemented recommendations from the Sherwin inquiry into foreign trusts. We've clamped down on tax avoidance by multinational companies, as well as introduced that anti-money laundering legislation and bills. So if we look at the least transparent countries, the top spot goes to Switzerland. The United States is in there, and surprise, surprise, that idyllic hotspot, the Cayman Islands.
Yeah. Last day for local trading in Xero shares today, Jono.
That's right. Xero is leaving the local exchange, going to have a primary listing in Australia, mainly because of Australia's size, the ability to get more exposure over there and money to help grow. So New Zealand shares will move over to the ASX, so local shareholders don't need to make any changes.
Right.
It will officially delist on Friday, but if we do a bit of history, they first listed here in June 2007 at $1 per share. They hit a high of around $45 in 2014 and closed today at around $34. So big numbers there.
Yeah.
I guess it raises the debate about attracting companies to list here in New Zealand. The NZX is doing a bit of work in that respect. They've talked about removing the alternative and next markets and having one main board, with any changes likely to be introduced at the end of the year.
What did happen on the markets today, Jono?
You had a big rise at the end of the day. It's probably to do with a bit of rebalancing investors for those top companies after Xero's exit. So there was quite a big rise, 143 points to 8,442. And as I say, those top 10 stocks made some good gains there.
Yeah, and Jono, that was all in the afternoon trade, wasn't it?
That's right.
Yeah.
Last couple of hours, it just shot up. So that's a point to note there. And the dollar is trading at 73.7 US cents, 91.3 Australian.
Jonathan Mitchell doing business for us from Wellington this week. Thank you so much, Jono. Let's go to the weather now, also in Wellington with Met Service meteorologist John Law. Kia ora, John.
Kia ora. We've got plenty of wet and windy weather returning towards New Zealand for Thursday. Severe weather watches and warnings already in place, and seeing that rain, for example, across the northern parts of the country as we head through the afternoon. Some fairly heavy falls even in towards Auckland and Northland. As we head down across the North Island, we'll find that rain pushing in from the west as we head in towards the afternoon. Some fairly heavy falls to watch out for, especially down the western side of the North Island, and some stronger winds as well, extending from southern Taranaki right the way down in towards Wellington. A rather blustery, windy looking day there with spells of rain. We're going to find those stronger winds across the country, rather gusty northerlies with us, the cloud thickening up on the eastern side, but even here we'll find some rain later on in the daytime. We're also going to find rain reaching in towards Christchurch as well. Now, temperature-wise, it's still fairly high as we go through in towards Thursday, but really we are going to find the wind and the rain the more noticeable feature, with plenty of it as we head across the South Island. Severe weather warnings in place for many parts of the South Island, especially for Fiordland, Westland and down towards Southland, Otago and Canterbury. The heaviest falls though out on that western coast. We could find 200 to 400 millimetres of rainfall as we head through Thursday, and accompanying that, those stronger winds as well. There's plenty going on, so please stay up to date with all the latest severe weather warnings.
Thanks, John. There is plenty going on. In fact, there is even more than plenty, because in breaking news, and we're still trying to firm up details, but there does seem to be a large fire in the Dunedin suburb of Burnside. Talk of evacuations. Fire crews are on their way. We'll bring you more information as it comes to hand. We're making calls furiously as we speak, but it is very dry there. A great deal of discussion of the weather this week in Otago and Southland, very much in the news. Drought officially declared there right now. I think the temperatures are about 32 degrees in Dunedin, 33 degrees north of Dunedin, Oamaru, North Otago. But rain, as John was just saying, is on the way. Heavy rain warnings have been issued for some areas, More on what heavy rain on hard, dry ground actually means coming up. But research by NIWA and work we've already discussed with Dr. Judy Lawrence from Victoria University a couple of nights ago tells us droughts won't just become more common, they'll spread in their areas of impact. Now, Dr. Andrew Tate is a principal scientist with the National Climate Centre at NIWA, and he told me he's been most surprised this summer by a couple of things: how early in the season it stopped raining and how dry it's been along much of the country's west coast.
We've seen a remarkable for how early it has been in the year and the season, really. Drying out of some parts of the country, in particular up the sort of Kapiti coast, Paraparaumu, up through Whanganui, and even right over to Taranaki, through Taranaki. That dried out very quickly, sort of November, December period, which is way earlier than what it typically would do if it gets dry at all in those locations. And also, quite surprisingly, at the same time, it was getting dry around Westport and Buller. Now, it's all a relative thing, of course. The West Coast is known for being
wet,
a relatively wet area. But when it's drier than normal, it certainly still impacts them just as much as it would impact another area of the country that is traditionally more dry.
Dr. Tate, your research papers suggest that tradition doesn't count, that it's change we're dealing with. Now, every time we talk about droughts, we get texts and emails from people saying, well, we've had droughts before, and that's true, but it's location and frequency that will be different?
I think what we need to do is appreciate that drought has always been in the sort of the New Zealand environment. What I think we'll have to do better in the future is be able to deal with these conditions more often than what we've seen in the past. So the ability to adapt our systems, our agricultural systems and horticultural systems, to manage dry conditions more frequently, rather than maybe a 1 in 10 year sort of drought, which is really impacts the business, but we're able to get over that and continue on. These types of events might happen, once in 5 years or even once every 3 years. So it's a matter of, can a business agricultural system or a horticultural system, or even viticulture, for example, can it still be profitable and sustainable as these types of events become more frequent?
Right, and after droughts, if we get heavy rain, as is forecast for some areas over the next few days, the very dry, hard soil can't absorb that water, right? So, trouble.
Yeah, that's a real problem. In some places, the ground is like concrete, and so you can just imagine getting a heavy rainfall on a concreted surface, and it runs off very quickly. It's very similar when the ground is that hard and dry. So when you get these very intense systems, just exactly as you say, that isn't actually all that beneficial for alleviating a drought. You will have obviously some of that rainfall seep into the soil, particularly after the rains have gone through, and there'll be puddles around, and eventually that will seep in, or most of it. Some will evaporate. But you're right. When you have a hard soil associated with particularly dry conditions, a lot of that rain will actually run straight off, and that actually can cause problems in itself, with erosion and loss of topsoil, and also some flooding.
It does seem extraordinary, doesn't it, that we may potentially in some parts of the country be going from a heat wave to flooding. We will keep an eye on the weather, of course. That's Dr. Andrew Tate, Principal Scientist with the National Climate Centre at NIWA. Secondary school principals have condemned racism towards students, exposed in a report out today. Students told researchers for the Office of the Children's Commissioner and the School Trustees Association of problems including discrimination by teachers and racist abuse from other children. Teacher unions say their members will find the allegations jarring and upsetting. Here's our education correspondent, John Gerritsen.
When researchers asked young people what they thought about school, some of the responses went like this.
Some teachers are racist. They tell you that you are not going to achieve.
I sense stereotypes in my teachers' eyes and gestures.
How they act towards me makes me feel like leaving.
Racism exists. We feel little and bad.
1,500 students were surveyed, 140 were interviewed, including at least one 3-year-old. Some said they were subjected to racial abuse by other children. The president of the Secondary Principals Association, Mike Williams, says the discrimination described by the children is unacceptable.
That was very concerning, really, the level of racism that was coming through and how those students felt they were being discriminated against. So that's quite a worry and, frankly, unacceptable. Some of the stories were quoted from the student voice that's in there. So I think as a country we do need to face up to that.
Many of the complaints were made by students in alternative education programs, and Mike Williams says it's clear they need a lot more support at school. Linda Stewart from the Educational Institute says the allegations will be upsetting for many teachers.
Teachers will be disappointed or upset to hear this. And the reason I say that is because no teacher comes into this profession wanting to do harm to students.
Linda Stewart says schools are trying to recognise children's language, culture and identity, but not everyone is there yet.
The education system is built on something that has been very monocultural for years and years and years and years and years. And if you look at the history of education in this country, you can see that. Well, now's the time to change that and to really look at what matters for our kids.
Jack Boyle from the Post-Primary Teachers Association says the report's findings will be jarring for secondary teachers.
I don't think the workforce are going to be surprised. I think that naturally as an educator you would kind of have that initial, oh my goodness, but I don't think that the workforce should be seeing it as, you know, we're doing a terrible job, it's all doom and gloom and it's up to you to fix it, because by and large I think the workforce are ahead of the game.
Jack Boyle says schools reflect society, and given some of the attitudes expressed in public about te reo Māori and the Treaty of Waitangi, it's little wonder children are encountering racism in schools. The Children's Commissioner, Judge Andrew Beecroft, says students made their comments about racism without any prompting from the researchers.
Yeah, it was surprising to us, it's disturbing. I'm sure most teachers would be horrified. I think what it shows is the importance of hearing from children. We're not that good at New Zealand in seeking out children's views, hearing their voices, factoring it into policy and decision making, in this case the national education learning priorities.
Judge Beecroft says the report shows the government needs to listen to children as it develops education policies and goals. For Checkpoint, ko John Gerritsen tēnei.
Jacinda Ardern are not too far away from making her What's Next speech. We'll go live to it. But first, Wellington's rental market is being described as a perfect storm, with landlords receiving dozens of applications within hours of listing their flats, and would-be tenants battling rising rents and weeks of searching. Property managers say the squeeze is due to more people in the capital staying in rentals, and changes to legislation deterring investors from taking the plunge. Trade mayors warning the shortage will only get worse, and rents are continuing to go up. Laura Dooney followed a group of house hunters for the day.
Student Natasha Ziakis and her friends have been looking for somewhere to live for a month. She's planning to live with her boyfriend Callum and another couple. The group has 5 places to look at. They start the day with a 3-bedroom house in the suburb of Mount Victoria.
We've been looking nearly every day and scheduling viewings and applying and filling out forms, because every company likes it done differently. So it means that it's kind of been like a full-time thing.
The flat in Mount Victoria is going for $735 a week. Groups are going in and out, but Ms Ziakis decides not to put an offer in. She says it's run down and mouldy. She then heads to Adelaide Road in Newtown. Outside the huge villa there, split into 3 flats, we meet William Potts, a working professional living there but wanting to find a 2-bedroom house with his partner. After looking all over Wellington for 2.5 months, they gave up and are moving home to Hawke's Bay.
Constant applications, constant viewings, working around work and partner who studies. Just very, very long time, and we still didn't succeed in finding a place.
Mr Potts says he would have been happy to pay $550 a week in rent, but in today's market he still falls short. Natasha Ziakis and her friends are keen on the flat in Newtown, which has far more hopefuls lining up outside it. At $650 a week, it's cheaper than the house in Mount Victoria and is much better maintained. Miss Ziakis says she's getting anxious about how long it's taking to find somewhere to live.
I am starting to worry in the way that university semester 1 is starting back up soon, and I don't really want to be moving while we've got assignments on, so it is a little bit worrying in the way that seems to be like no accommodation.
The third place is another 3-bedroom apartment in Newtown. The flat overlooking Ridderford Street is described as the worst of the lot by the prospective tenants and costs $720 a week. It has no sun, the foyer smells, and the property manager didn't show much interest in people looking around. Steve Pyre is also there. He's extended his search for a 1-bedroom flat as far as Levin, more than an hour drive outside Wellington.
Usually there's at least a dozen people, sometimes more, and there's queues, you got to wait, you got to fill out the forms. I've filled out so many forms now, I've forgotten how many I filled out.
Kevin Boyce has been looking at flats with Natasha Ziakis and her friends for his daughter, who couldn't be there. He says he's picked up on the apprehension of people needing a home.
They're comparing with their mates in other parts of the world, being Auckland and to a lesser extent, but Christchurch, they'd be paying a lot less for what they're seeing here, and they're loading into that a tenancy fee. Just up front, you've got to pay a bond, and usually that's 4 weeks' rent. That's fair enough, and 2 weeks' rent in advance. So that's a lot of money.
Mr. Boyce says if things don't improve, Wellington will lose out.
This is the capital, and we've got really good universities here. 2 places like Canterbury, which is rebuilding, and yeah, the university's good down there, but if the rents are less and the university is as good, they're going to vote with their feet.
As for Natasha and her friends, 2 days later they got in touch to say they'd got the flat they wanted on Adelaide Road, but for many more, the hunt continues. For Checkpoint, Laura Dooney.
Thanks, Laura. Let's go now live to the fire in Burnside, Dunedin. But we're not going exactly to it. We're going to Bill Galanders, who owns a business nearby on McLeod Road and can see it. Bill, you good man. Thank you for joining us. How big is it?
Well, I don't own the business. I'm running it from my brother.
Well, you richly deserve to own it for being such a good bugger and talking to us. What's the fire like where you are? Is it big?
Yes, although it seems to be under control. It hit a young pine plantation which is full of gorse, and it just blew straight down towards the old Burnside freezing work. But they've got a couple of helicopters working there now, and it's getting under control.
Where's the golf course in relation to the fire and that vacant? There'd be a bit of dry material for burning around there, wouldn't there, at the back?
Yes, there is, but it missed us. He's spraying us now. Yes, there is. But it blew down our boundary. It just ran down the boundary line.
Wow. We're moving really fast. Have you got a bit of a wind going now, Bill?
Yes.
Yeah, and it's dry, really dry.
We've had a hot, dry wind all day. And that, I don't know how it started. It started in some gorse and long grass up the top of the hill, and it just went straight down the hill like a house fire.
Yeah. So are buildings in danger, or are the choppers with their monsoon buckets doing a good job of sort of cordoning the fire off?
I don't know what's in front of the fire. I wouldn't think so. I think the fire brigade got to the bottom of the hill before the fire did. I hope so.
Yeah. Good work by them.
I don't know. I certainly hope so. It was heading towards the green waste disposal. I hope all the machinery over there is okay.
Yeah, thanks, Bill. We really appreciate you joining us live, Bill. Bill Galanders, who is running a business for his brother, as he was saying, near to the fire. Well, it's hot, as Bill was saying, really hot. Dogs left in hot cars, dogs with dehydration, dogs with burnt pads on the bottom of their feet. The SPCA and vets have seen it all during the current heat wave, and Dr. Mark Vetty, who's an animal behaviour consultant, suspects some of us need a bit of a reminder that dogs aren't quite as robust as we think, particularly with heat. Neglect and mistreatment are serious issues, but Dr. Vetty says mistakes and bad luck can also be really problematic when the weather is so hot. Indeed, he almost learnt that the hard way himself.
I had a misfortune, didn't result in very serious with my little guy Tommy, and he'd slipped into the car through a door that I hadn't noticed, and someone closed the door, and by the time I got to him, he was virtually blacking out, and and they start to hyperventilate, and their pupils dilate. They get then they go down, and and slowly the body starts to shut down, because their thermostats telling them that they're way above what they can deal with. So the most important thing to do with that type of dog straight away is douse them in water. Get them, try and bring their body temperature down through evaporation is the main kind of approach at that time. But it's a slow deterioration, well, actually it's quite a rapid deterioration from when they start getting heat exhaustion to when they potentially can die. And so it's rapid. The car temperatures are massive when that car's closed, and the same can happen even in a hot room, that's got a lot of sunlight into it, so that's the sad thing. And that point you made about feet, black sand, asphalt, anything like that, dogs' feet will burn, and it's really hot. Take your own shoes off and put your foot on the ground or feel the ground to really know, because we wear shoes, we don't think about it, and you can literally scorch and burn their feet quite badly.
Absolutely, and it's never occurred to me. Of course, that's a totally obvious thing to point out, but I would have thought, clearly mistakenly, that because a dog doesn't wear shoes, their feet, for want of a better term, are hardened against the reality of standing on hot surfaces. But a hot surface is a hot surface, right? A dog is going to burn as well.
They have got quite robust feet, so that's good. That's why they can run on stones and of course that depends on how you condition them, what type of conditions they live in. But at the end of the day, you feel those surfaces, and when you're at Muriwai, for example, and you try and get across that sand without your jandals on,
you can't.
You're gonna burn your feet, and you would burn dogs' feet too. So that they'll show a reaction normally. Some are a bit stoic than others, so take that very clearly that they can't run on that type of surface, and you've got to be more careful about that for sure.
Mark, what about working dogs at the moment? And we're hearing a lot of sales are going on, sheep sales in particular, because there's just not the feed for them, which means the working dogs are out. What sort of protection do they deserve? You mean
they're out working on?
Yes. I mean working in the height of the day, for example.
Yeah. Well, I mean the good thing about farmers normally is that first of all the dogs are better conditioned to work in high temperatures. The thing that we've done well in our breeding is we've bred with our working breeds to be well conformed and the right size and shape and able to deal with temperatures better than the average pet. They don't always have the best kenneling and the best, sometimes those are out into exposed situations, and some don't supply enough water and all of those kind of things. So obviously, those are important whether you're a farmer or not. The dog does have basic needs and they must be fulfilled, and for them to allow themselves to regulate their temperature, they need water normally, and they need shade, and shade doesn't mean just under a tin roof, which is often what they do. They're still out in the baking sun under a tin roof, that radiates a lot of heat and gets too hot for a dog. So obviously you should have your kennels under some kind of natural shade trees or something like that as well to give them better protection.
One final question. You're talking about shade, and boy, we've been hearing from a lot of listeners over the past 2 or 3 nights about the conditions stock are in. Are we good enough at providing enough shade for the animals we're farming at times like this?
Well, I don't think so personally. I mean, I think we're pretty, as a country that farms millions of animals, and we've got pretty kind of parched earth kind of policy in the way, we don't have our hedgerows and those kind of things like in England and places like that. You see that they supply the animals the opportunity to get out of the hot sun. I mean, obviously those species are hardier, and that's good. The wool affords a lot of protection on a sheep, and cattle and horses and so on are certainly hardened to the weather much better than we are. But nevertheless, they still shade is important for them, and water is fundamental, obviously. And I think the onus is on farmers these days to really start to look at whether they do need to have some sun protection in paddocks, whether it's natural or whether they're building a bit of shelter in the corners of some paddocks.
Dr. Mark Vetti does in fact think we can do much better with shade for our stock, and that is an issue we will follow up on Checkpoint. Jacinda Ardern's just started speaking. The 100-day plan and beyond is the title of her speech. A few of the pleasantries up the top, thanking people and big picture stuff. We're going to cut the chunk which we think is most salient in terms of specifics, and we will bring it to you after 6. But we do want to update now what's happening in Dunedin. Emergency services are at the scene of a fire in the McLeod's Road area of Burnside, Dunedin. Police are at traffic cordons on McLeod's Road, Kaikorai Valley Road and Main South Road. Police are asking people to avoid the area if possible. That is in from the police then. It sounds like there are 3 helicopters fighting the fire and a lot of on-the-ground machines. The problem is it is hot and dry and there is a wind fanning it. We're not sure the extent to which this is under control, and we will absolutely update it the moment we get more information. So that's the fire in Dunedin. Katrina has more on the fire in Southland, which we think is being more successfully battled in the news coming up.
RNZ News at 6. Kia ora, good evening. Ko Katrina Batanaho. Nationals Deputy Paula Bennett has dismissed speculation about her position, saying she's heard nothing but support from her colleagues. There's been some talk among National MPs about whether the current leadership team is the one to lead it into the next election. Here's our political editor Jane Patterson.
The leader, Bill English, says he has strong support as leader and has dismissed speculation about the position of Paula Bennett as gossip. She also says she's confident she has the full backing of the caucus. Some senior MPs have publicly expressed their support today, including Amy Adams, who says she has zero interest in a leadership change. When asked if she had any leadership ambitions, she told reporters no one can predict the future, but she wants Mr English to remain as leader for a long time yet. From Parliament, Jane Patterson.
The government has imposed a target to cut child poverty within 10 years. The Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern unveiled the goal in a major speech in Wellington this afternoon, evaluating her first 100 days in power. Ms Ardern yesterday revealed her cornerstone legislation to ensure future governments monitor child poverty. She's now released the targets her Labour-led government will strive for over 10 years. The government wants to lift 100,000 children out of low-income households, leaving just 60,000 remaining. The manager of the Invercargill wood plant, where authorities are battling a large fire, says it started when a wall of wood chips caught alight. At least 5 helicopters are battling the blaze at the Southwood Exports plant on Kikeno Place near the Invercargill to Bluff motorway. The fire is reported to have started when a wall of wood chips caught alight. The wall was being used as a sound insulation after the factory had a dispute with its neighbours about noise. The plant's manager, Ross Best, says after eating through the wall, the fire spread quickly through dry grass surrounding the plant.
It would be 50 metres long, 20 metres wide and sort of 15 high. That was burning, but it just spread out into the grassland around it for about 2 or 3 hectares, I suppose. Didn't jump the railway tracks, but it didn't get across the State Highway 1.
Ross Best says the wall and some surrounding vegetation has been burnt, but there's no damage to property or people. And in news just ahead, fire and emergency say the blaze is now under control and no longer a threat. The fate of a bill allowing people to grow their own medicinal cannabis is likely to come down to a small number of MPs. Green MP Chloe Swarbrick says she's been crunching the numbers and it's touch and go whether she'll have the backing for her bill. The government's medicinal cannabis bill, which passed its first reading yesterday, lays the groundwork for a regulated medicinal cannabis industry and would provide for terminally ill patients only. Chloe Swarbrick's bill goes further and would allow people with debilitating conditions to use the drug. She says MPs need to vote with compassion.
We have a handful of MPs that we're going to need to get across the line, and I'm hoping that with the eyes of the patients who would benefit from this medicinal cannabis on MPs, that they will be voting with their conscience.
Green MP Chloe Swarbrick. The American President Donald Trump says he'll keep the controversial prison at Guantanamo Bay in Cuba open. The facility has been used for years to detain accused terrorists and had been targeted for closure by Barack Obama. It's been criticised for its grim conditions and treatment of detainees. In his State of the Union address to Congress today, Mr Trump said keeping the doors open is a necessary part of the fight against terror.
Today, I'm keeping another promise. I just signed, prior to walking in, an order directing Secretary Mattis to re-examine our military detention policy and to keep open the detention facilities in Guantanamo Bay.
During his State of the Union, Donald Trump also heralded what he called a new American moment, saying with the successes of his administration, there has never been a better time to live the American dream. The journalist who exposed the Mr. Asia drug trafficking ring and whose investigations led to the pardon of Arthur Allen Thomas has died. Pat Booth died at a rest home in Kumeu, aged 88. It was at the Auckland Star in the 1970s that he became involved in two of the biggest news stories of the decade. Convinced Arthur Allen Thomas was innocent of the 1970 crew murders, Mr. Booth's investigation into the police case eventually led to a commission of inquiry, and in 1979 Arthur Allen Thomas was pardoned. He also headed the Auckland Star's special investigative team, which uncovered the brutal Mr. Asia drug syndicate and the activities of drug kingpins Terry Clark and Martin Johnstone. Pat Booth later worked in local newspapers, retiring from writing just last year. It's 6:05. Sport. French club Lyon has confirmed it signed former All Black Charlie Ngatai. The Chiefs midfielder confirmed yesterday he was set to head to France at the end of the Super Rugby season, but he hadn't signed a deal. Lyon announced today on social media that Ngatai, who played his sole test for New Zealand in 2016, had signed with them. Meanwhile, the third Bledisloe Cup match between New Zealand and Australia in 2018 will be played in Japan. The match will be played at the Nissan Stadium in Yokohama at the end of October. It's the second time a Bledisloe Cup match has been played in Japan and will be a warm-up to the 2019 Rugby World Cup in Japan. The New Zealand netball coach Nolene Taurua has given up her aspirations of coaching the Silver Ferns. The former Waikato Bay of Plenty Magic head coach is contracted to the Australian franchise, the Sunshine Coast Lightning, for one more season, but says her future is back in New Zealand.
Whether I'm looking at board level or CEO level in netball, I'm not too sure. And very open, to be honest, as to what happens in 2019 and beyond. I've gained massive experience over here.
Nolene Taurua. And Arsenal have suffered another painful defeat in English Premier League football, losing 3-1 away to lowly Swansea City this morning. The result dents Arsenal's top four hopes and lifts Swansea out of the relegation zone. That's the news.
A ship sinks in the Pacific.
This is a tragedy that demands an independent commission of inquiry. We need to know why it happened.
A ban on waka jumping.
Once the electorate has spoken and cast its verdict, it is not up to any single individual MP to change the proportionality of party representation in Parliament.
And will Nationals leaders walk the plank?
A lot of the agitation is directed towards the deputy at this stage, and there's still quite a lot of confidence in the leader, Bill English.
At the helm, Morning Report with Guy Aspinall and Susie Ferguson, weekdays from 6. Then on 9 to noon, the battle to get Tourette syndrome classified as a disability, as it is in Australia, the UK, Canada and the US. And after 10, the latest on the New Zealand detective work being done on a mysterious medieval scroll and the 600-year-old secrets it's revealing. Join me, Catherine Ryan, on 9 to noon after Morning Report on RNZ National.
Met Service weather through to midnight tomorrow. Warnings for very heavy rain and severe gales cover central and southern New Zealand. Northland to Wellington, including Coromandel Bay of Plenty and the Central High Country. Fine today, apart from isolated showers from Northland to Bay of Plenty. A period of rain tomorrow with possible downpours. Northerly gales tomorrow, severe about Wellington and Taranaki. Gisborne to Wairarapa, fine today, scattered rain spreading north tomorrow with northerly gales. Marlborough, Nelson and Buller, isolated showers today, rain with downpours tomorrow, easing in the evening, severe gales for a time tomorrow. Westland and Fiordland, rain becoming widespread and heavy this evening, downpours and severe gales for a time tomorrow. Canterbury, fine today with high cloud, rain and severe gales about the high country tomorrow, spreading elsewhere during the day. Otago and Southland, mainly fine today, rain with heavy falls developing overnight and easing late tomorrow. And for the Chatham Islands, fine spells. It's 6:08 and you're listening to Checkpoint.
Thanks, Katrina. It was supposed to be Bill English's moment to describe the state of the nation, big set piece, but instead his speech today was overshadowed by speculation about the state of the National Party leadership, focused on Mr English himself and perhaps more directly on his deputy, Paula Bennett. At a media conference following his speech in Wellington this afternoon, Mr English was asked whether he'd commit to leading the party into the 2020 election.
The leadership of an opposition party, and we saw in the last opposition parties, is contingent on performance. So I commit to the performance that's going to maintain confidence in my leadership.
So you've got no intention of maybe leaving between now and the next election?
As I said, I commit to performing at the level that's going to maintain their confidence.
And
there's every indication that that's the case. I mean, we've got an opposition that's performing well. It's holding its public support generally. We have supporters who expect us not to go on holiday just because there's a new government, but to hold that government to account. And that's what and I'd take some credit for the transition through from government into opposition. And in the next week, we're going to be talking about our plans for rolling through this year.
MPs have told us that there has been some talk about the leadership, about that team at the top. What's your response to that?
I'd be surprised if there's any political caucus where there isn't sometimes some talk about, you know, who's next or who's third in line or who's fourth in line. I mean, these are ambitious people who want to change the way the world works and see politics as a way of doing that. So I wouldn't be at all surprised if there's some talk, but I'd have to say the conflation of that into some kind of threat to my leadership I think is ridiculous.
What about Paula Bennett's deputy leadership?
I don't think there's any issue there at all. I don't know whether, you know, there's some gossip about someone said they didn't like her. Well, you know, Paula is a robust politician. She's used to not being liked by some people, and I have every confidence in her.
What if those people, though, that don't like her are in your own caucus?
Well, there may be some, but I have every confidence in her leadership and no deputy leadership and no indication from the caucus that they want to change it.
Have you spoken to your family about party discipline?
Well, I think they can see that when you're in opposition, any kind of discussion around leadership can become a bit of a story. But I have to say I'm not concerned about a breakdown of discipline. But I think it's good for them to understand that we have set a very high standard as a caucus around party discipline, and one of the reasons we're successful as a political movement with quite high support even in opposition is because we've been a disciplined and cohesive team.
When is your first reshuffle, Mr English?
Sorry?
When's your first reshuffle?
I haven't considered a reshuffle. We've just had, as I think we talked about when we went into opposition, I took a relatively conservative view of transitioning people from ministers into areas where they had relevant expertise, and I think that's worked pretty well. At some stage there's bound to be a reshuffle because you go into opposition, you don't have ministers and backbenchers, there's no hierarchy, and you work out who's better at opposition and who isn't, but that'll take some time.
Would the caucus retreat potentially be a time either to discuss the leadership and I suppose air any potential concerns or strategy going forward, or have a confidence vote in the current leadership team?
No, I don't think there'll be any discussion about the leadership at the caucus. If anything, a bit of a burst of speculation like this has probably hardened up support, and I'd be very surprised if it was raised at all. We'll be.
It's Bill English not really getting to react to his State of the Nation speech, talking about leadership. Jacinda Ardern making her kind of State of the Nation speech. Not really, just looking forward. We're just chopping up chunks of that. She's making it as we speak, and we will bring that to you next. But before that, let's go to Auckland's North Shore, where Milford residents, which is just up the coast from Takapuna, were woken up at 3 o'clock on Sunday morning to find sewage flooding their homes. They say it took 4 hours for Watercare to turn the switch to stop the leak. Raw sewage. They now want to know why it took so long and why Watercare allowed the pump to continue to push the sewage out of a broken pipe. Carol Pilcher is a health professional who lives on one of the affected properties on Elmer Road. She and her husband were woken by firemen and watched in disbelief as the sewage flow got heavier through the morning.
This sewage spill apparently was noted around about 2 o'clock in the morning. We were aware of it by about 3 o'clock. And this sewage spill was going through 3 properties and into their houses and garages. And I had contacted Watercare twice, and my neighbour, frequently had contacted Watercare. One man in a van came round. He didn't know what to do, I don't think, or he had been telephoning people, but no one was turning up. And that sewage flowed from around about 2 o'clock to 10 o'clock in the morning. Now, Watercare did come round. I think they arrived around about 8 o'clock, and then we had a lot of people arrive. But the sewage still flowed. And as people got up, obviously in the morning, and they were using the toilets and showering, so the torrent actually increased. And we noticed it started increasing because it started coming over towards our garage. And I know our neighbour was just saying to them, please just turn off the pump, because honestly I've never seen a torrent like it. And there seemed to be some difficulty if they had to get authority, I'm not too sure, to turn off the pump from the council. That was what I understood. And finally, I think Watercare made the decision to turn the pump off. And then they had to get a backup pump and basically take the raw sewage that was collecting and put it through the stormwater drain. That was my understanding. That's what I witnessed.
Why do you think it took them so long?
I think it went through a call centre. I think the call centre obviously had to contact people. I think there was a very, contacting one person who has to ring another person, who has to ring another person, and I think that was it.
What would you like to see the council or Watercare do so that this doesn't happen again?
Nikki, it will happen again because we've had a couple of sewage spills, I understand. Hopefully never on this scale. What I want to see is I want that when someone makes a phone call saying there is a sewage spill, I want something like an emergency response team involving the council, Watercare, fire brigade. They come round and, okay, they may not be able to shut off the pump for the sewage, but at least put sandbags down. I want a coordinated effort. I want efficient effort. I don't want one man in a van basically not knowing what to do. This was a major health hazard. That amount of effluent flowing through people's houses into the stormwater drain, it was massive scale. You just had to be there to witness it. They need to evaluate their processes and get it more efficient, because it should never happen again for someone to stand outside for 3 hours waiting for someone to come and help.
That was Elmer Road resident Carol Pilcher speaking to reporter Nikki Mando. Watercare says this is one of the worst spills Auckland has seen in the last 25 years. It might be one of the worst, but they are quite common. Its spokeswoman, Maxine Clayton, says the repair was hampered because the pipe was close to a major electrical line and transformer, and crews needed permission from Vector. Let's go back to Washington. The US President has appealed to the American people to set aside their differences and unite as one family. In his maiden State of the Union address to Congress, he said his first year in the White House had taken forward what he called his righteous mission to make America great again for all of its people. The BBC's David Willis was watching.
The man who spoke just a year ago of American carnage was more upbeat tonight.
Mr. Speaker, the President of the United States.
Taking a moment to pat himself on the back for the booming economy, the President called on all Americans to set aside their differences and seek out common ground.
This, in fact, is our new American moment. There has never been a better time to start living the American dream.
Bipartisan compromise has been in short supply here during a turbulent first year in office, and the President hopes to build bridges by repairing them. He pledged to overhaul the country's ageing infrastructure. And calling on the parents of 2 teenage girls who were murdered by gang members in the country illegally, the President turned to the thorny issue of immigration reform. He's offering a path to citizenship for some illegal immigrants who came here as children in return for tougher border controls.
So let's come together, set politics aside, and finally get the job done.
The United States was winning the war against Islamic State, the President said, but all too often terrorists had been captured and then released. Reversing the policy of his predecessor, he pledged to keep the military prison at Guantanamo Bay open. He focused as well on the nuclear threat posed by North Korea, singling out a man who travelled thousands of miles on crutches to defect. There was no word of the Russia investigation. That was left to the Democrats in their response. A rising star of the party with a famous last name taking the administration to task.
A government that struggles to keep itself open. Russia, knee-deep in our democracy.
This first year of office has been a tale of two Trumps. There's teleprompter Trump and Twitter Trump. And going into his second year, the president and his party need more of the former and less of the latter. Not only in order to push through his controversial legislative agenda, but in order to maintain their majority in Congress.
It was the BBC's David Willis in Washington. A former military spy who stole sensitive operational equipment and developed a drug habit after a posting overseas has been convicted for drugs and burglary. Now, Corporal Richard Graham had walked away from the district court without conviction, but the Crown successfully appealed that decision to the High Court. So it went from district to high. Justice Hinton found the district court judge had erred in law when she determined the consequences of Graham's offending outweighed the seriousness of the crimes. Our court reporter Edward Gay has been looking into this High Court decision. I asked him what we know of Corporal Graham's background.
The Air Force officer spent 3 years in the sensitive specialist intelligence role. It carried a high level of risk and it included being deployed overseas. He had security clearance, a high level of security clearance, and was able to enter the storeroom on the Whenuapai airbase. And that inside that storeroom contained what is described as operationally sensitive equipment, end quote. And we don't know any more detail than that. But
so you don't know it, or you know it and it's...
No, I honestly, hand on heart, don't know.
Okay, yeah.
And I recall Tom Furley, who covered the hearing, he actually asked the lawyers involved. They also didn't know, or at least weren't telling. So, look, that information hasn't been publicly released.
So highly secret, Edward.
Operationally sensitive.
We shouldn't laugh.
We shouldn't laugh. We shouldn't. He also stole tools from a construction site on the airbase, and that was where workers were working on a new development. All up, the stolen items have a price tag of $200,000. During the investigation of the burglaries, the police...
$200K?
$200,000, yeah, that's right, of all those items. And when the cops were investigating these burglaries, they ran a search of Graham's house and also a storage unit. And inside there they found BZP pills in his house. That's the party pill drug, and in the storage unit they found 391 grams of NBOME, something I haven't heard of previously, but that's a psychoactive product similar to LSD. Police officers also found 2 cell phones, and on those phones there'd been 700 calls made in a 4-month period.
Right, discharged without conviction in the district court.
That's right, yeah. So Graham pleaded guilty in the Waitakere District Court and in front of Judge Belinda Pidwell, and he was granted a discharge without conviction in the lower court. That meant Graham walked free. He walked free from court without any of these convictions on his record.
Which would be unusual for the magnitude of the offence, right? But the justification I remember from Tom saying at the time was the circumstances in which he found himself in this position, I guess.
It's essentially this area of the law requires the judge to undergo a process where the judge looks at the seriousness of the offence and whether the consequences outweigh the seriousness of the offence. So it's a process which the judge has to go through by examining what the crime was and whether or not the consequences outweigh the crime.
So the district court judge made that determination. The Crown appealed to the High Court, right?
Yeah, that's right. Judge Pidwell basically found that Graham had planned what to steal. There was a significant breach of trust, but there was no evidence Graham had made a commercial gain. And she actually concluded there were exceptional and significant circumstances. Now, tied into that, she cited Graham's stress from the overseas deployment, a character reference from a senior officer, and Graham's rehabilitative efforts. She also concluded that if Graham was convicted, he'd likely get a dishonourable discharge from the military. That would have serious consequences on his ability to later get employment. She said he had been sent to a hostile country, had to work his own way through what had happened, and quote her, "I do not think anyone can underestimate the effects of war on an individual," end quote.
But the Crown... So they simply weren't satisfied with the extenuating circumstances, the exercise of mercy, I guess, in a pejorative term. So what did they argue in the High Court?
Yeah, so the Crown basically essentially argued that the judge had erred in law. The Crown prosecutor Scott McColgan actually described this case as theft as a servant on steroids, and he said that basically Judge Pidwell in the District Court had failed to determine the seriousness of the offending and also the likely consequences that would flow from it.
And the High Court judge said?
She agreed. Justice Hinton agreed. She acknowledged Graham was now drug-free, but the High Court judge also noted that the negative effect on Graham's deployment overseas. She said the court had this affidavit from the senior officer that I mentioned before, and that senior officer actually said that 3 of Graham's colleagues had approached the officer over difficulties with assimilating back into a normal life back in New Zealand. And the officer also noted that there were 5 others that had behavioural changes, as the court put it. But Justice Hinton in the High Court said Graham's offending should not be kept secret from future employers. She said regardless of whether or not Graham was convicted, the Air Force was aware of the offending. They'd take that into account when they decided his future. She also found Graham had already been given an apprenticeship in the building company, and Justice Hinton noted that no other case remotely similar had resulted in a discharge without conviction. She sent the case back to the District Court for Graham to be resentenced. Justice Hinton ended her judgment by acknowledging it was a highly unusual case. She said she accepted Judge Pidwell's comments about the difficulties of being sent by the armed forces overseas to a hostile environment and not receiving appropriate treatment on his return. She also said she was impressed by the way Graham had responded to the charges and hopes he's actually an example to others. Graham's lawyer, we've talked to him this afternoon, Carl Trotter. Mr. Trotter says he's already applied to the Court of Appeal to take the case further. He's yet to hear back from the senior court, and he wouldn't comment further.
It's Edward Gay, our court reporter. Fascinating case, this. Really interesting News Hub Read Research poll on TV3 a short time ago. The party vote, Labour 42%, that's up 5.4% since the election. Of course, they were up sharply before the election after Jacinda Ardern became leader. Nats are holding steady on 44.5, basically identical to their figure in the election. So 44.5 the Nats, 42 Labour. That is the closest the two parties have been since Helen Clark was leader of the Labour Party more than a decade ago. Meanwhile, Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern has outlined her government's ambitions beyond its first 100 days. Remember, the election was in September, but Winston didn't make his decision until October 19th. Jacinda Ardern speaking to an audience at St Peter's Church in Wellington. Ms Ardern, the Prime Minister, yesterday revealed her cornerstone legislation to ensure future governments monitor child poverty. Now, we've had some technical issues getting the audio from the venue to the studio. We're really sorry about that. But in summary, a few minutes ago, she released the targets her government will strive for over the next 10 years. The government wants to lift 100,000 children out of low-income households, leaving just 60,000 remaining. That measure of income is determined before the cost of housing is deducted. The 3 10-year targets are reducing the proportion of children in low-income households using the before housing measure from roughly 1.5% of all children, 15% of all children, to 5%. So that is a material reduction over 10 years. Reducing the proportion of children in low-income houses using the after-housing cost measure from roughly 20% to 10%, so halving it. and reducing the proportion of children in material hardship from between 13 and 15% now to 7%. So once again, halving it. These are the targets. Specifics on how that will happen still to come. The Prime Minister has also talked about other significant challenges facing the government, including a growing prison population and high rates of Māori imprisonment. She also talked about New Zealand being a member of a Pacific Island community under threat due to rising sea levels. She talked about that at some length, and she said we have somewhat abrogated our responsibility as a country that makes moral leadership decisions in the world, and that we are going to address that. The government is going to address that. She said the government must be one which embraces and builds relationships and partnerships with iwi. Now, obviously, our gallery is there recording the speech and talking to the Prime Minister afterwards, and there will be audio of it, of course, on Morning Report. A big picture, macro kind of speech, rather than micro details from Jacinda Ardern at St Peter's Church in Wellington. We're sorry we couldn't bring you the audio. We've just, it's been stuck in the works, so to speak. We've been using slightly less polite language, but this is still a public broadcaster, and so I will behave accordingly. Thank you for being with us this evening. We appreciate your company. They're still fighting hard to get on top of that fire in Dunedin. It is in scrub, we understand, trees and gorse, not damaging properties yet. Helicopters are fighting it. Fire engines, police have cordoned off the area around it. In Burnside, do take care if you are in that part of Dunedin. The fire in Southland and Invercargill is under control. What a busy day it's been. Thank you for your company on behalf of the Checkpoint team. That is the program for tonight. Have a good evening, and we'll be back tomorrow at 5.
RNZ News headlines at 6:30. 4 helicopters are fighting a fire on McLeod's Road in the Dunedin suburb of Burnside, and police are evacuating buildings and closing roads in the area. Fire and Emergency says a blaze at an Invercargill wood plant is now under control. Heavy rain has started falling in Fiordland and Stewart Island, and the West Coast is being warned to brace itself for a stormy night. Met Service says the storm will move northwards to the West Coast and Nelson, and then eastwards to Otago. The government has announced a target to cut child poverty within 10 years, reducing the number of children in low-income households by 100,000. Tonight's vote on Chloe Swarbrick's bill allowing people to grow their own medicinal cannabis is expected to be close. A Nationals deputy, Paula Bennett, has dismissed speculation about her position, saying she's heard nothing but